What's up, Sci Fam? It's your boy Nickel here, and today we're going to set our science notebook page up like this. The title of your page should be Types of Data. And we're going to basically look at two different types of data that can be categories for almost all data, I think, actually. And that's quantitative data versus qualitative data. We'll describe the differences between them, we'll define them, and we'll also draw some pictures to help explain the different types of data. So let's get started. Now, like I said, make sure that title reads Types of Data. And the first one we're going to look at is quantitative data. So quantitative data, think about what word does that make you think of? Well, that might help us with a definition, because quantitative data describes the quantity. Okay, so the quantity is what we're describing here. It describes the quantity of an observation. And it must be numeric. So there was this one time I was rock climbing. I was coming down from the rock climb and it was like just past sunset. I was dropping into this little gully area with my climbing partner, and all of a sudden there was like tons of bighorn sheep. There was a giant herd and they were all hanging out, and they all started moving all together, and you could hear all of their hoof prints move across the rock. Now that's a good story and all, but it's better if I told you that there was like close to probably like 75 bighorn sheep all hanging out together. And so when all of them ran away, that was 75 times 4, because they all have 4 hooves. 4 hooves were all running on the rock. So that was crazy. Now, if I tell you the quantity, the number of bighorn sheep there, that is way different than me just telling you there was a bunch of them. Because there could have been 15. That could be a bunch. Because usually when you see them on the side of the road, there's like 5 of them. So it's important that in science, when we have an observation and we want to describe the quantity, that we're very specific about the quantity. And quantity means a number, basically. So some things that can be measured with quantitative types of measurements are things like temperature. And go ahead and record these here underneath the definition and draw a little picture along with it to help us remember and to add some extra just details here on our science notebook. So that was supposed to be a thermometer, but my app here messed with it. So if I were to draw a thermometer, it's got the mercury here on the bottom, and it is going to show us what the temperature is of some type of substance. And so this has little marks on it so that you can actually count the number of degrees that something is going to be measured in. All right, another thing that could be measured with quantitative or quantities or numeric observations could be something like time. If you said it happened in the afternoon, well, did it happen at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m.? So time is something that we can measure using numbers. So I'm going to draw myself a little clock here, like a little stopwatch. And again, we use the numbers on here to tell the time. Another example of quantitative data is something like, I don't know, your age. How old are you? Or actually, let me just write age. So age is a number, and we talk about the number of years that somebody has traveled around the sun. How many times have you traveled around the sun? That determines your age. And another one we could use is something like, how are you? We do this in crew, where it's like, hey, how are you today? Give us a number between 1 and 10. So that number allows us to understand how you're feeling. There's other ways we could describe that, but if we're doing quantitative data, then you'd want to give a number. And one last one here could be distance. So if you say something was really close, or you're like, hey, why don't you come on over to my house? I don't live very far away from you. Well, I want to know, how far away do you live? Because someone that lives between here and Japan, or if someone lives in Japan, that's pretty far. But if someone lives like across the United States, that's pretty far, but it's not as far as Japan. So you could say the distance is not as far as if I were to live in Japan, but it's better if you tell me, what is the actual distance? Is it 600 miles, or is it 6,000 miles, or is it 60,000 miles? It's really important that we use numbers to describe what a distance is if we're making a quantitative data observation, or an observation using quantitative data. Okay, the other type of data that could be collected in an observation would be quantitative data. Let me get a color here that we're going to use. Let's use green for qualitative data. And so qualitative data, try to think about what word is within this qualitative data. It describes the qualities. The qualities of an observation. So if you were asked by somebody, maybe a significant other, like, ooh, what qualities do you like about your partner? What are the qualities of that person? Or your best friend, you could say, what are the qualities that make somebody a good friend? So it's ways that we describe something. So these must be descriptive. Or maybe you have a pet, and if I were to say, well, what are the qualities that make your pet a good pet? Or what are the qualities that make a bad pet? Those are going to be things that are descriptive. They are not numbers. They're descriptors. And so that's the difference between quantitative and qualitative data. Qualitative data is going to describe. Quantitative data is going to be numeric. So qualitative data, those could be things like, for example, if I were to draw myself a little ice cream cone here, this ice cream cone could be described using flavor, for example. So flavor would be a descriptive type of way that I could talk about my ice cream cone. And so that would be a qualitative type of observation, is the flavor of ice cream. Another thing could be the color. So if you think about, let's say you saw a bird. If you saw a bird, that's all cool and everything, but if you told me that you saw a purple bird, that would be very different than if you saw a red bird compared to a black bird. So we can use color to describe an observation that we might have. There's my bird. Another example of how we could use descriptors or qualities about something is if we were to describe the texture of something. So maybe something's really smooth, or maybe it's just a little rough, or maybe there's a lot of friction and it's like really spiky. So each of these could be described using texture as a quality. And another one that we could use would be size. Oftentimes, we don't ask somebody how long their arms are or how tall their torso is. We say, hey, do you wear small, medium, or large t-shirts? We use size descriptors to discuss the qualitative aspects of our clothes. And then lastly is actually related to one of the questions above. Because when we said, how are you, we could say, hey, between 1 to 10, use a number to describe how you are. But we don't have to use numbers to describe how we are. We could also say, how are you? And that could be something like, you could say, I'm really sad. Or, oh, I'm okay today. Or you could say, it's a pretty good day. Or you could say, oh my gosh, it's the best day ever. I am stoked and excited. So we can use different emotions to describe how we are, and that's a quality of how we're doing. So this is the difference between qualitative data and quantitative data. The biggest thing that you need to focus on is basically what is the root of the word. Here it's quantitative, quantity, and down here it's qualitative or qualities. So keep that in mind as you remember the difference between quantitative data and qualitative data. I'll catch you on the next video.